History records dates, names, and places, but it rarely records fear. Some mansions were built not just with bricks and wealth, but with silence, suffering, and secrets buried so deeply they still whisper centuries later. Tonight's story lives at the edge of history and horror, where official records end and unanswered questions begin. What happened inside this grand plantation was never meant to be remembered, yet it refuses to be forgotten. Amma was never meant to exist where she did. On plantations like Nottoway, the architecture itself enforced hierarchy, with wide staircases and polished floors reserved for the enslavers, and narrow paths, back doors, and distant quarters meant for the enslaved. Children like Amma were expected to be invisible, their lives confined to labor, punishment, and survival far from the main house. Yet Amma's presence inside the mansion broke an unspoken law of slavery, one enforced not just by overseers but by fear itself. The very fact that she lived beneath the same roof as those who owned her body marked her as an anomaly, a living contradiction to the rigid order that defined plantation life. She moved through spaces designed to exclude her. Hallways lined with portraits of men who profited from suffering, rooms heavy with perfume and candle smoke, staircases worn smooth by generations of boots and silk slippers. Every step she took inside the mansion carried risk. A glance held too long could invite punishment. A sound made at the wrong moment could mean violence. Amma learned early how to shrink herself, how to walk without noise, how to exist without being seen even when she was standing in plain sight. Her presence was tolerated but never accepted, allowed but never explained. No official record clarifies why Amma was kept inside the mansion, which only deepens the unease surrounding her life. Some enslaved children were brought closer to the house to serve as personal attendants, to fetch water, polish silver, or tend to younger, white children. But Amma's situation appeared different. She was not listed among household servants in the way others were. Her role shifted constantly, as if no one wanted to define her place too clearly. One day, she might be ordered to clean a guest room. The next, she was made to stand silently in corners during conversations she was never meant to hear. This blurred boundary between servant and witness made Amma dangerous in ways her enslavers understood instinctively. Enslaved people were expected to know their place, but Amma's place was unstable, hovering too close to power. She heard arguments behind closed doors, whispers about debts, violence, and disgrace that could ruin reputations if spoken aloud. She saw bruises hidden beneath fine clothing and learned which smiles were masks. Knowledge like that was not meant for her, and yet it collected inside her like a slow-burning fire. Her presence also unsettled others on the plantation. Enslaved adults noticed how Amma slept closer to the mansion than they did, how she vanished inside at night while they remained outside under watch. This separation isolated her from her own community, cutting her off from shared language, comfort, and protection. She belonged nowhere, too close to the masters to be safe among the enslaved, too enslaved to ever belong inside the house. Isolation became another form of control, one that left no visible scars but hollowed her out from within. Inside the mansion, Amma learned the rhythms of fear intimately. She learned which floorboards creaked and which doors should never be opened. She learned how laughter could turn to cruelty without warning, how a raised voice could silence an entire room. The mansion was not just a home, but a stage where power performed itself daily, and Amma existed in the shadows of that performance, absorbing its cruelty without ever being acknowledged as human. Her body was present, but her personhood was denied so completely that even her suffering felt unrecorded. What makes her presence truly forbidden is not just the physical space she occupied, but the symbolic threat she represented. A child like Amma, living within the mansion, blurred the illusion that enslavers tried desperately to maintain. The illusion that the house was a place of refinement, order, and moral superiority. Amma's existence contradicted that narrative simply by breathing the same air. She was a reminder that wealth rested on violence, that elegance was built on exploitation, that beneath the polished surface of the mansion lay something rotten. Even those who ordered her there seemed uncomfortable with her proximity. She was watched more closely than others, corrected more harshly, punished for mistakes that might be ignored in someone else. It was as if her very survival inside the mansion was an offense that had to be constantly repaid with suffering. She became a vessel for tension, absorbing the anger, paranoia, and guilt that haunted the house. Every time she passed through a doorway she was not meant to cross, she reminded its occupants of truths they refused to face. Amma's forbidden presence transformed her into something else entirely, neither servant nor child, neither fully seen nor completely erased. She became a silent witness embedded within the heart of the plantation, a living record of what happened behind closed doors. And in places like Nottoway, where power depended on silence, a witness was the most dangerous thing of all. Amma learned early that sight was a burden heavier than labor. Inside the mansion, her eyes were forced open to a world never meant for her, and once opened, they could never close again. The walls did not protect innocence, they erased it. Every room carried echoes of conversations spoken under the assumption that no enslaved child could truly understand. Yet Amma understood more than they imagined. She listened from doorways, behind curtains, beneath staircases, absorbing truths not written in ledgers or records. The mansion taught her that knowledge could be as dangerous as defiance. She saw violence disguised as discipline and cruelty softened by polite language. She learned how quickly affection could become punishment, how laughter could sharpen into threat without warning. When guests arrived, Amma watched the transformation of the household, how fear was hidden behind smiles and obedience was polished into performance. She learned which enslavers drank too much and spoke too freely, which ones carried their rage quietly until it erupted behind closed doors. These observations were not choices. They were survival instincts forced upon her by proximity. Amma also saw what was never discussed openly. She witnessed enslaved women summoned at night and returning changed by morning, their eyes emptied of something that could never be named. She noticed injuries explained away as accidents, bruises hidden beneath long sleeves, blood washed quickly from floors before daylight. No one explained these things to her, yet explanation was unnecessary. The mansion itself instructed her, lesson by lesson, that suffering was routine and silence was law. The child who saw too much became careful in unnatural ways. Amma learned how to control her face, how to keep her eyes lowered even when terror pressed against her chest. She trained herself not to react, not to flinch, not to cry out when sounds carried through walls late at night. She understood that memory itself could be punished, that being known as someone who noticed too much could shorten a life. So she carried everything inward, storing fear and truth where no one could reach it. Her knowledge extended beyond cruelty into the private machinery of power. She overheard discussions of debts, betrayals, illegal dealings, and whispered plans meant to preserve wealth at any cost. She learned which family members despised each other behind practiced smiles, which alliances were fragile, which reputations were already cracking beneath the surface. For a child born enslaved, this kind of awareness was forbidden. It placed her dangerously close to the inner workings of those who believed themselves untouchable. This awareness changed how others looked at her, even if they could not name why. Some avoided her gaze, sensing something unsettling in her silence. Others watched her too closely, as if afraid she might suddenly speak. Amma's quiet became threatening, not because she said anything, but because she did not. She existed as a vessel of unspoken truth, a reminder that nothing inside the mansion was truly hidden. The psychological weight of witnessing shaped her more cruelly than physical labor ever could. Amma carried images she could not share, questions she could not ask, and understanding she could never reveal. Childhood, as others experienced it, slipped away unnoticed. She did not mark time with play or innocence, but with moments of realization, each one stripping something human from her. The mansion aged her without leaving visible marks. At times, she sensed that the house itself was aware of her presence. The way shadows stretched unnaturally long in corridors, the way sounds traveled at night, the way certain rooms felt heavier, as if memory clung to the air. Amma moved through these spaces like a ghost in training, learning the geography of fear by heart. She knew which rooms carried grief, which carried anger, which felt wrong even in daylight. To see too much was to live in constant danger, yet ignorance offered no safety either. Amma existed between these states, fully aware and completely powerless. She could do nothing with what she knew, and that helplessness hollowed her from the inside. Each secret she carried pressed against her ribs, reminding her that knowledge without power was a form of imprisonment. The tragedy of Amma's witnessing was not only that she saw horror, but that she was forced to understand it without context, justice, or escape. She learned how systems of cruelty functioned while being crushed beneath them. The mansion did not merely house her body, it invaded her mind, shaping her thoughts, her fears, her silences. By the time she vanished from history, she was no longer just an enslaved child, but a living archive of suffering, carrying within her everything the plantation needed forgotten, everything the walls had absorbed, everything that could never be spoken aloud, everything that lingered long after footsteps faded, everything that still seems to watch from the darkened corridors, waiting, remembering, breathing, listening, knowing. Fear ruled the plantation more effectively than chains ever could. And Amma learned that punishment did not always arrive with raised hands or whips. Inside the mansion, cruelty was quieter, more deliberate, designed to sink into the mind and stay there. Orders were often delivered in calm voices, smiles stretched thin, consequences implied rather than spoken. Amma learned to read tone instead of words, to recognize when silence itself was a warning. The absence of sound could mean danger approaching, and stillness often preceded suffering. Whispers followed her everywhere. Though rarely addressed to her directly, she heard them slip between servants, drift through hallways after doors closed, crawl along staircases late at night. Some spoke of her as a mistake, others as a problem that should never have been allowed inside the house. Rumors painted her as cursed, unlucky, or unnatural. Explanations meant to justify why she did not belong. Amma understood that these whispers were not harmless. They shaped how others treated her, how quickly punishment arrived, how little mercy was offered when mistakes were made. Punishment inside the mansion took many forms, and some left no marks at all. Amma was denied sleep, kept standing for hours, ordered to repeat meaningless tasks until her body trembled from exhaustion. Sometimes she was isolated completely, locked in small rooms or made to sit alone in dark corners where time seemed to dissolve. No one explained why these punishments happened, which made them more terrifying. Cause and effect blurred until obedience felt impossible to measure. Silence was enforced as strictly as labor. Amma was taught when to speak and, more importantly, when not to. She learned that asking questions invited suspicion, that reacting emotionally was dangerous, that acknowledgement itself could be interpreted as defiance. Over time, she mastered the art of erasing herself, responding only when spoken to, keeping her gaze low, her expression neutral. This silence was not peace. It was survival disguised as obedience. The mansion demanded emotional discipline as much as physical compliance. Amma was expected to witness cruelty without response, to endure humiliation without protest, to accept injustice without visible reaction. When punishment fell upon others, she was sometimes forced to watch, a calculated act meant to teach through fear. The message was always the same. Suffering was inevitable, resistance was pointless, and memory itself could be punished if it showed on her face. Even kindness, when it appeared, carried danger. Small gestures could be withdrawn suddenly, replaced by harsher treatment if misinterpreted as entitlement. Amma learned not to trust moments of softness, understanding that affection could be used as leverage. This uncertainty kept her constantly alert, measuring every interaction, weighing every word before it formed. Silence became armor, but it also became a prison. The psychological weight of this control pressed down relentlessly. Amma existed under constant surveillance, real or imagined, never certain when she was being watched. Footsteps behind her, doors opening unexpectedly, voices calling her name could trigger fear instantly. She internalized discipline so completely that even alone, she regulated herself, afraid of being overheard by walls that seemed to listen. The mansion did not need guards in every room. Fear had already learned to guard itself. Whispers also served another purpose. They isolated her further. Other enslaved people kept their distance, unwilling to be associated with someone so closely watched, so frequently punished. Amma became a cautionary figure, proof of what happened when one existed too close to power. This isolation deepened her vulnerability, leaving her without allies, without comfort, without shared language to process what she endured. Silence expanded until it filled every part of her life. Punishment followed patterns that Amma recognized but could never escape. It intensified after moments of tension among the enslavers, after arguments, after visits from outsiders. She became a convenient outlet, a body upon which frustration could be released without consequence. This randomness taught her that suffering did not need justification. that her pain was not personal but systemic, yet it felt personal every time it landed on her. Over time, the line between discipline and erasure blurred. Amma was punished not only for actions but for presence itself. Her proximity to forbidden spaces, her unavoidable witnessing, her mere existence inside the mansion seemed to require correction. Silence was demanded until it became reflexive, until words felt foreign in her mouth. Even her thoughts learned to quiet themselves, shaped by fear into something small and contained. The whispers never stopped, even when she vanished from sight. They lingered in the house, carried by those who remembered her and those who pretended not to. Punishment and silence had shaped Amma into something nearly invisible, yet the imprint of her suffering remained, woven into the fabric of the mansion itself. In places where cruelty was hidden behind elegance, silence was never empty. It was heavy with everything that could not be spoken, everything that had been enforced, everything that remained long after voices faded, breathing through walls, pressing into darkness, waiting, listening, refusing to disappear. In 1859, Amma's presence simply dissolves, not with the drama of escape or the finality of death, but with a silence so complete it feels deliberate. Plantations documented everything of value: crops, livestock, purchases, sales, punishments, yet Amma leaves no trace behind. There is no bill of sale, no transfer record, no notice of escape posted in surrounding towns. For someone who lived so close to the heart of power, her sudden absence is unnatural. It suggests not neglect, but intention. Those who remained at the plantation noticed her disappearance immediately, though no one spoke of it openly. Enslaved people understood that asking questions could invite suspicion, so Amma's name faded from conversation, even as her absence lingered. A place where she once stood remained empty, a task once assigned to her redistributed without explanation. Life continued as it always did, but with a subtle imbalance, like a chair removed from a familiar room. Official silence often hides unofficial violence. One possibility whispered later was that Amma was moved secretly, relocated under cover of night to prevent questions. Such transfers happened when an enslaved person knew too much or had become inconvenient. Yet even this explanation feels incomplete. Transfers left paper trails, however small, and Amma's erasure suggests something more final. The absence of documentation feels less like oversight and more like removal. Another theory passed quietly among those who survived the era was that Amma never left the plantation at all. That she was punished one final time, away from witnesses, and buried without record. Unmarked graves were common, and the land around plantations absorbed countless bodies without acknowledgement. If this was Amma's fate, her disappearance was not an accident, but a calculated act, ensuring her knowledge, her memory, and her voice would never surface. There were also murmurs of confinement rather than death. Some believed Amma was locked away for an extended period, hidden within unused rooms or outbuildings, a living secret kept until she broke or faded. Mansions like Nottoway were vast, with storage spaces, attics, and sealed rooms rarely visited. The idea that someone could vanish inside such a structure without notice was not impossible. The thought unsettled those who heard it, because it suggested that disappearance did not always mean absence. What deepens the mystery is how quickly Amma ceased to exist in memory among the enslavers. No mention in letters, no complaints of lost labor, no acknowledgement of a missing servant. It was as if she had never been there at all. This erasure required collective agreement, an unspoken decision to forget. Forgetting in this context was not passive, it was enforced. Amma's disappearance coincided with a period of growing instability, when tensions around slavery intensified and the future of plantations felt uncertain. In such moments, secrets became liabilities. Anyone who embodied contradiction or knowledge posed a risk. Amma, with her proximity to private spaces and unguarded conversations, represented something dangerous. Removing her removed the reminder. For those who remained, the disappearance changed the atmosphere of the mansion. Rooms she once cleaned felt colder. Hallways carried an unease that had not been there before, as if something unresolved lingered. Enslaved workers avoided certain areas without knowing why, guided by instinct rather than instruction. The absence of explanation fed imagination, and imagination fed fear. Over time, Amma's disappearance became less an event and more a presence. She existed as a question that could not be asked, a gap in routine that never fully closed. Her erasure from records did not erase her from experience. Instead, it transformed her into something less tangible but more persistent. She became a story carried in glances, in hesitations, in rooms avoided after dark. Historical silence often masquerades as emptiness, but emptiness has shape. Arma's missing record stands out precisely because of how complete it is. No fragments, no partial mentions, no errors to suggest oversight, just nothing. This kind of nothingness is rare. It implies effort, coordination, and fear. The disappearance of 1859 was not merely the loss of a child from history. It was the deliberate severing of a narrative that threatened to expose too much. Whether Ama died, was hidden, or was erased in another way, the result was the same. She was removed from the future so the present could remain undisturbed. Yet disappearance does not guarantee forgetting. The land remembers what paper refuses to record. Walls absorb what voices cannot say. Ama's absence became part of the plantation's identity, woven into its silence. Long after slavery ended, visitors would remark on an unexplainable heaviness in certain spaces, on the sense that something unfinished lingered. These sensations did not come from records or stories written down. They came from what was missing. In a system built on control, disappearance was the ultimate punishment. It denied not only life, but acknowledgement. Ama's vanishing ensured she would not testify, not resist, not survive in memory as a person. Yet in trying to erase her completely, those responsible created a different legacy, an absence so precise it demands attention, a silence so loud it refuses to settle, a disappearance that continues to echo through the mansion, through the land, through the unanswered question of what truly happened when Ama was last seen, when footsteps stopped, when the house closed in on itself, when history chose not to write her name, when forgetting became policy, when the impossible became real. Long after the chains were gone and the plantation's purpose rewritten for visitors and history books, the mansion refused to become quiet. Buildings like Nottoway were meant to age into monuments, their past softened by distance and polished narratives, yet something in its halls resisted that transformation. Those who walked its corridors after emancipation often described an unease they could not name, a sensation that did not come from imagination alone. It was as if the house remembered more than it revealed, holding tightly to moments that had never been allowed into records. People spoke of sounds that had no clear source, soft footsteps moving at night when no one else was awake, too light to belong to an adult, too deliberate to be dismissed as settling wood. Some heard movement along staircases that led nowhere important anymore, as if someone still followed old routines, repeating tasks long after they no longer mattered. These sounds never announced themselves. They lingered just long enough to be noticed, then vanished, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than noise. Certain rooms carried a weight visitors struggled to explain. The air felt colder, thicker, pressing against the chest. Guides avoided lingering too long, redirecting attention to architecture or dates when discomfort surfaced. Windows in these rooms seemed to dim the light rather than welcome it. Even during the day, shadows pooled unnaturally in corners, refusing to lift completely. People reported the sensation of being watched, not with threat, but with expectation, as though the space itself waited for acknowledgement. Children, unburdened by historical explanations, reacted most strongly. They paused in hallways, turned suddenly as if someone had spoken, or refused to enter particular rooms without knowing why. Some described seeing a small figure at the edge of their vision, gone the moment they focused. Adults dismissed these accounts as imagination, yet the consistency of location unsettled even skeptics. The same corridors, the same rooms, the same uneasy reactions, repeated across generations. Employees who worked in the mansion often developed quiet rituals. Lights left on longer than necessary, doors kept open, routes altered slightly to avoid certain passages after dark. These behaviors were rarely discussed openly, but they accumulated, shaping how people moved through the space. No one claimed certainty. No one named what they feared. They simply adjusted, as though responding to an unspoken rule the house imposed. The idea that a place could remember suffering unsettled those who preferred history to remain distant. Yet memory does not belong only to people. Trauma seeps into walls, floors, and ceilings, repeating itself in subtle ways. Ama's life had been defined by proximity to fear, silence, and punishment, all contained within the mansion's core. If anything remained of her, it would not announce itself loudly. It would linger quietly, woven into the structure itself. The mansion's grandeur intensified the contrast. Crystal chandeliers and wide verandas could not erase what had occurred within. Beauty, rather than cleansing the past, sharpened its cruelty. Visitors felt the contradiction instinctively, sensing that elegance had been used as cover, not redemption. Amma's presence, once forbidden yet unavoidable, mirrored this contradiction. She belonged and did not belong, existed and was erased, seen and denied. Stories passed down locally spoke of a young presence rather than an angry one. There were no reports of violent hauntings, no dramatic displays meant to frighten. Instead, there was persistence, a feeling of unfinished business, the sense that something waited to be recognized rather than escaped. This subtlety aligned with what Amma had been forced to become in life, quiet, watchful, constrained by rules she did not choose. Some believed the mansion itself acted as a vessel, preserving what history attempted to discard. When Amma vanished, the building absorbed the unanswered questions, the silenced knowledge, the injustice that never found resolution. Over time, these fragments shaped the atmosphere, influencing how people felt even if they did not know why. The house remembered because forgetting had been demanded. Attempts to reframe the mansion as merely a historical site never fully succeeded. No amount of restoration removed the underlying discomfort. New paint did not lift it. New narratives did not dissolve it. The past pressed through the present, subtle but insistent. Amma's story, though unwritten, shaped how the space responded to those who entered it. The idea that a child's existence could imprint itself so deeply disturbed those who encountered it. Yet, it made a terrible sense. Amma had lived where she should not have, seen what she should not have seen, and disappeared without explanation. Her life was unfinished, unresolved, and denied closure. In a place built on control and silence, unresolved lives did not fade easily. Over time, the mansion's memory became less about fear and more about witness. The sense that something observed rather than attacked, remembered rather than punished. Visitors left with questions rather than answers, carrying discomfort with them. The house did not seek to harm, it sought to be acknowledged. Amma's story lived on not through documents but through sensation, through the way footsteps sounded too small, through rooms that felt occupied even when empty, through the lingering awareness that some lives were never allowed to conclude properly. The mansion remembered because it had been made to forget too much, and in remembering it refused to let the story end cleanly, refused to smooth over absence with silence, refused to release what had been taken into its walls, holding it there, quietly, patiently, watching those who passed through, listening as they tried to explain what they felt, carrying forward the weight of a child who was never meant to be there, yet never truly left, remaining where memory thickened, where history hesitated, where the impossible continued to breathe.